Well, this last presentation today is on, as you see on the topic, is mediating complex cases for international corporations, and it could be national corporations too, because what happens is sometimes the national corporations end up doing particular work or business with international corporations, or doing international business that involves, if you will, issues, and sometimes those issues may be legal and or could be cultural issues pertaining, but they become international issues. And so as a result of that, that's what you have when you're dealing with international corporation. So what I'm going to start off in saying is, my name is Dr. Ralph Steele, as some of you know, and I'm going to give you, first of all, some what I would call some assumptions that's related to international corporations. And here are some of the assumptions that I'll kind of give you a gist of as we do those. The first is one of the assumptions is I very highly recommend that you, as a mediator, you use the evaluative style. That's number one. Number two is one can assume that most complex mediations with international corporations probably have what we call a cause of action. And a cause of action is basically a legal term that gives the case a legal basis. And then thirdly, a mediator definitely needs to complete what we call pre-mediation. And there's a number of things that one would need to do when you're doing pre-mediation that we'll go over later on as we get to that. The fourth thing is the mediator needs to receive a mediation brief from both parties. And all that is a brief synopsis of what the case is about from both parties. And if you get one from one, you got to get from both. So that's what you have. Typically, a mediation brief can be anywhere from 2 to 10 pages, depending on the complexity of the case. And then the case could also be, when you talk about complex cases, they also could be multi-party cases as well. They may involve 3 or 4 parties. Also, those cases predictably would probably be in the millions to hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases even in billions of dollars. Those are the kind of cases. We're not talking about the typical mom and pop shop. And so the next is the venue of international law must be considered, especially when there is a contractual dispute, because then if not, then you're going to have some issues, cross-border issues. Who's going to do the venue? Now, one of the assumptions is, in some international cases, is that some companies are already now beginning to rewrite law. And what does the law say? It will say that party A might be or might have the authority in a particular case for what? The venue. Because if you don't decide that before it happens, then Wally got jaw, you're going to have a problem. And the spirits is not going to solve that case then. And so the next thing you have is it probably will take several sessions to complete the mediation process, if not several what? Months. Sometimes even several years, depending on, again, the complexity of the case. The next is be prepared to use expert opinion in the process, what we call subject matter expert. Nobody knows it all, including me. A review of case law as it relates to the case might be very well appropriate. And a lot of times I have people ask me, they will say, well, I'm not an attorney. Well, and I'll say to them, you don't necessarily always have to be an attorney, but you have to what? Understand the context of law and be able to, at least if not nothing else, articulate, you know what I mean, and respect to it. There's a difference in practicing law and understanding law.
But if you're not able to do that as a mediator, because that's not your area of expertise, then you shouldn't be mediating.
You probably shouldn't
exactly
mediate that case. You can really just call my number and I'll help you out very easily. Complex cases seem to be more settlement driven. What does that mean? That means, what's the cost of the case? What's the value of the case? How much is the case worth? How many lawyers are coming to the mediation? We heard the judge say, risk managers, listen, you can have all the risk managers you want, but you're going to have some risk attorneys on the case also. They're going to be there. I've done cases that had up to 18 attorneys on a complex international case. That's just a fact of life. You know what I mean? Also, complex cases, I just said, will invariably always have attorneys on both sides, even if it's nothing more than one or two. A lot of times they're also going to have one of the most expert opinions person, which would be probably a CPA or probably some type of accountant. Somebody who counts the beans. We call them the bean counters. That's just a fact of life as well. Another assumption is, as we talked about earlier today by one of our presenters, is you have to be aware of what? Cultural issues, right? Just even in this room, we have different cultural issues. And sometimes just a matter of thought, or schools of thought, it can also be what? Cultural issues. Another assumption is, be careful for scheduling mediation on or near certain holidays. Because some people don't do anything on holidays. I won't tell you what I do on holidays, but we'll discuss that later. Global perspectives help normalize international corporate mediations. And when you get into global perspective, that might be, if you will, international policy. That might be some international law that comes out of the Hague Convention. That might be an agreement that two companies or two businesses or two corporations or two nations, two presidents, two nations who have sovereignty may have signed, that you might want to be aware of before you even enter into the mediation. Because guess what? If nothing else, you certainly do not want to violate, some type of international policy or international law, because if you do that, then I always tell people, if you violate an international policy, don't call me. I'll have a 1-800 number for you. And there won't be any spirits after you call the number. So those are some of the assumptions. There's a few other assumptions and recommendations I would like to just kind of also share with you as it relates to doing complex cases. And one of those is single method approaches are not as successful.
Are you saying that you should have a dual mediation team?
You can have either a dual mediation team, or you can have what? A panel of mediation. You could have 3 mediators on one panel, and then you might have what is called the chief mediator, because you need to have somebody in charge, particularly when the stakes are high. The second is the separation of legal issues from extra legal ones, despite the interconnected nature of issues, period. You want to separate them and be very clear about that. The third thing is the failure to recognize emerging hybrid approaches. Because guess what? Everybody has different styles of mediation, don't they? It doesn't matter what your style is. What works best for you is what's important. That's all that really matters. Now, of course you need to start, I always tell people, start off with evaluative, and then, as the mediation progresses, you might want to take then a different or more relaxed or more calmer, less indirect approach in the mediation once you can kind of have an assessment and an analysis that the mediation is going to settle. The next is lack of acknowledgement of the rights-based and interest-based methods for conflicts. Because if you don't deal with people's rights, you know what I mean? In other words, and what I mean by that is different regions have different particular issues, and they have different rights, different from other countries and other sovereign nations that you might need to know about. What that means is that when you're doing a commercial, complex corporation case, you want to do, in my recommendation, is do at least 4, in some cases, if you get into rights, you want to have at least between 4 to 8 hours of what? Pre-mediation, off the board. And notice I didn't say free pre-mediation, did I? I said paid mediation, pre-mediation. You know what I mean? Free is, the word freedom means thunder and lightning, and the dollars come before, not after. The last one is the lack of international perspective for an international dispute and an integrated international dispute resolution system. Now, I'm talking about a systems approach now, because if you don't have, particularly when you're doing international, you want to be as system approach as you can. One of my perspectives on mediation is I try to be systematic and use the system approach as can, because guess what? When you use system, you also, like Derry, you said earlier, is that also presupposes that if you're using system, you're going to have a panel of mediators. You're going to have a panel of attorneys for both sides. You may have 2 CPAs or bean counters. You may have some corporate mediation do have the CEOs there. It depends on their perspective. Some people, are hands off. Some people have a more, I don't want to say a micromanaging approach, but they're just more, if you will, hands on, to be safely put, and not that they're trying to look over their employees' back or anything, but they just want to know what's going on, because what? In the international corporate mediation, the stakes, when you're talking about millions and billions of dollars that can be lost in a lickety split, those CEOs definitely, without question, want to know what's going on. And they're going to be there. All of the cases I've done, even if the CEO was not physically there, guess what? They'll come in and they'll stay for an hour or 2. They'll leave. They'll come back. They'll be on the telephone. You take a recess break. You go in the caucus, or from some people, private meeting. Guess what? Their representative, their attorney, will email or text them the status of the mediation. They want to know what's going on. And even you as the mediator, you know what I mean, you'll give them, one of the things I notice about the corporate mediation is they take a lot of breaks, a lot of recesses. Money talks, doesn't it? You don't stop people from taking breaks, you know what I mean, when you're talking about millions of dollars, because in that situation, you know what I mean, and they're sitting there and negotiating back and forth and thinking about what's going on, you don't need a break. It's because these kind of cases are not going to solve in 2 hours, in 8 hours. It's not going to happen. And because my approach, folks, is this with corporate mediation. No, I'm not trying to make any of you in here attorneys or lawyers, but what I am saying, mediation from the corporate perspective is a form of law. Now, you'll have people who will argue against me because, we all know there's different schools of thought. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But essentially, here's the reason why I'm saying that mediation then becomes a form of law. Now, and I want to make a clarification because I don't want to confuse anybody. When I say mediation is a form of law, I am not saying that mediation is the practice of law, because it's not that. It is not that at all. It is only a matter, when I say a form of law, a matter of what? Number one, due process, because you have to give everybody, business or individual, the right to due process. That number 2 is when we will get to the end. If you're talking about settlement, you also are talking about the enforceability of, of the contract. Because at the end, if you get a contract, guess what? How is that contract is going to be enforced? And then the judge himself, if the case is court ordered, or if it's seen in an international court of law, guess what? The judge want to know that the contract is legally and written based on what? Contract law. First of all, most corporate cases are going to be stacked with lawyers. One way, if you're not an attorney, I have a law background, but I don't always write the agreement. But here's what I do, and here's what I recommend you all to do. If you're the mediator, or if you're on a panel of mediators, guess who's responsible for that contract? Pardon me? No, the mediator is. You have the fiduciary responsibility for that agreement at the end. Now, what I do is I make allowance for attorneys on both sides to actually
amend the agreement.
to even write the agreement. But at the end of the day, guess what I do? And what I also recommend you all to do. You have to review that agreement and make sure with the parties exactly that the agreement is right. One of the ways you do that is simply this. That's why I'm big on pre-mediation. When you're doing corporate mediation, you have to do pre-mediation. There's absolutely no way around it. Here's the reason why. Preparation will save you. Not only will preparation save you, but it will increase the likelihood for the mediation to do what? Settle. So that's very good. Because if you do your preparation, guess what you're going to do? One of the preparation things that you would do is have a conference with both attorneys and make a decision. If you're the mediator, you're in charge. So you're going to make a professional mediator leadership decision to know who is going to write the agreement, but you're going to review it because you got to sign off on it. You got to sign it. And I know you're not going to sign your life to 4x6, if you get my drift. Because I'm not coming to visit you if you do. I'll send you some spirits, but I'm not coming to visit you. It's really just that simple. And so what I always do is I have a pre-conference hearing with both attorneys, or the risk manager, or the CEO, or whoever is. It could be, guess what? Corporate mediation. You could have an operations manager there. And have that discussion of how, in other words, you make all of the planning processes. That includes the location, the venue, the time, everything.
But in the pre-mediation session, do you say to each party, what do you want to have happen? Do you do that in the pre-mediation session?
I don't get into what do you want to happen in the pre-mediation session. What I get into in the pre-mediation session is basically what type of mediation it is, what type of discovery, what the process is going to be like. What do we need, but not what you want. I don't get into what you want in the pre-mediation session. You understand what I'm saying? Because if you get into what you want in the pre-mediation session with these kind of mediation session, then you might as well go ahead and do the mediation right then, and then you'll never get out of that pre-conference hearing, and then you're going to open up a can of worms then that you won't be able to close. That's what's going to happen. So I don't do that, and I don't recommend you to do that. It's strictly what the process is going to be like based on your style of mediation. Whoever's the mediator, number one, like I say again, the time, the location, the venue, where is it going to be held, and 9 times out of 10, you probably want to do it in a neutral place. Somebody will say, I have this lovely, because all of these big corporations have these lovely, conference rooms with all kind of video and, they have all drinks and food and everything that you need. But people typically want to have a neutral session. Even if you have to bill, the session, and have it paid for a different location if you don't have the space yourself. Because sometimes, you may have, give you an example, in a corporate mediation, I've actually had 18, but it's been a range of 18 to 35 people at a particular mediation session. That's a lot of folk to be able to manage. So that's why you don't want to get into what they want. It's strictly, just beginning the process. That's all it is. Getting into what type of discovery, what kind of documents that you need. That's what it's all about. I don't go any further than that. And then, of course, what's the most important thing for the mediator? Get your money and make sure that you're approved and you have an agreement that if you're going to do 4 hours of pre-mediation, don't bill them later. Let them know in advance so there's no question. Y'all, everybody clear with? Because that way you can't come back and say, well, I did 4 hours and you don't have an agreement. What I recommend you do is you let everything on the table, and what I do is I sign a document stating that this will be 4 hours of pre-mediation plus the hourly fee once we commence the mediation. I haven't had any problem with that. Because it's better to be safe than start something and be sorry. That's just kind of how it is.
It's transparent.
It actually is. Now, quick question for everybody. And this is what I say to everybody. Beyond just when you start off and we all talk about, every mediation, hopefully it's what? Confidential, which we all talk about. That's nothing new to, especially more experienced mediators. But also is no fault. Also, because if you get into fault finding, it doesn't work. The mediator have to hold the profession and the leadership for the parties that it's not a fault finding process, but it's a no fault, conversation. And I'm telling you, I don't know how to tell you that when I tell the parties that it's no fault, and especially in these corporate type mediation, you're again setting the pace and the tone that you're going to relax people, and then you're going to make it safe, and you're inviting people into your space of trust and credibility, rather than letting people get into. Because if you get into fault finding, boy, you go figure. I wouldn't want to be you. That's the way it's always been, for me, from that perspective, in terms of just simply going like that. Now, here's where we're going. Beyond just this, there are what I call four major things that in every corporate mediation, or any mediation for that matter, that every mediator ought to always look for. And they are obvious. There are four things that we all ought to look for. And I don't care what kind of mediation you do. And if you overlook them, you're already dead in the water. And if you can't swim, you're going to sink. Number one is this. Number one is, in every mediation, there's emotions. And especially in corporate too. One of the great myths about corporate mediation is people think, well, there's no emotion in them. Listen, if you mess with my money, I'm going to have some emotions with you. We're going to have an emotional conversation. And if you mess with if we talking about millions of dollars, we're going to have an international, very emotional conversation. You know what I mean?
World War III.
That's exactly right. We're going to have what I call a nuclear emotional conversation. when you play with my money. It's two things you can't play with, my money and my food, and I won't tell you the other one. If you want to know, set up an appointment after this session. So in all mediation, there are emotions. Now, I have this thing, there's a range of emotions. Because there's only two types of emotion. And I know most of you already know the answer to that, right? Either the good or bad. And there's a ranges of emotion within the context of both good and bad. Either you're doing good emotions or you're doing bad emotion. If you're submitting good emotion, then you're more likely to do a response. And also, whether you're in prevent mode or intervent mode and being proactive. If you're submitting negative or bad emotion, then guess what you have there? Then you have reaction. And you're going to be up the creek, and I don't tell you which one it is. If you find out, you let me know. So that's number one, emotions. Number two is I call it, you're looking for the value of what I call the green society. The green, and I don't mean plants or vegetation at that time, even though I love the beauty of green plants. I'm talking about money. You always is going to, when the first thing I do is make an analysis and an assessment on the green society. I have people ask me, folks, they say, well, what party are you? Are you Democrat? You're in America. Are you Republican? You know, I said, I am a member of the Green Party. So do you want to join me and become a member of my Green Party? I have a membership right away. So you have to make an assessment of what's the value of the money of that case. Period. One of the ways you can discover that is if the case is what? If the case is court ordered, guess what? You can just get it off of the document, or it may be in the discovery process. The third thing you would do is, if you have to do, is this here. It's what I call communications. Because again, no matter what type of case you have, you're going to have a level of communication. I always assess what type of communication that people have when they have it. And part of communication is the history and background that two, corporate, or if it's a nation, that they have. What kind of relationship do they have? How well, and what are the speaking terms of their own now? One of the ways I discover how bad the communication is if it's a lawsuit, litigation is already, and if it's in court, guess what? You can determine that by how much money that the plaintiff is requesting. Because when the communication goes down, the litigation request for money goes up. It's always that from the situations that I've seen. The last thing that you're always going to look for is been this here. Is always, what are the legal issues? And I'll state again, you don't have to be an attorney to understand legal issues. It drives me nuts when people want to act like folks who are very intelligent, but may not have a law degree, think that they don't have the capacity to understand legal issues. One of the most famous legal issues in the world internationally is how much money you going to pay me when this case is over. That's a legal issue. A money issue is a legal issue too, because most of the corporate cases are about money anyway. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be talking about, I'm sorry, or I'm going to write you an apology, Ray. It's going to be about, you're going to write me a check. And people say, do you trust them? No, I don't. If I trust folks when the check is in the bank and it is cleared, that's the only trust right there.
What you're talking about kind of reminds me of diplomatic mediations, which take months, like you said, where they go back and forth, and sometimes there is no agreement, but they're very complex cases because you're dealing with a history, you know? So it's almost like a diplomacy kind of thing, which could take months.
And you're correct, because a lot of the corporate or international corporate case, there is a level of diplomacy that involves, you know what I mean, those type of cases. And a lot of times, those kind of cases, if you will, you might even meet, I mean, I had one case and got a chance to meet not the ambassador who was involved in the case, because sometimes some of the policy issues that involves issues that may be related to the United Nations, or, you know what I mean, and a couple of times they may even be involved with the Hague, which, of course, now you're talking about international law issues. So you might meet, you know what I mean, situations or issues may arise that may have something to do, you know what I mean, without question, international law and principles.
And it always goes back to reparation.
Yeah.
The financial aspect of
Could be.
how much money will these people get for what happened.
Yeah. Here's some other recommendations that you all might consider. Number one is, first of all, first, international conflicts are a priority. They have to be, because like anything in life, who don't want civility in the global society? We all do, hopefully. It's just a given, isn't it? Second, an active role, evaluative approach, particularly with intangible issues, because it's the intangible issues that can destroy and cause destruction more than tangible. And you say, well, what are the intangible issues? A lot of times they are some policy or some type of legal issue that may arise. Or it could also be some type of issue that you're not going to deal with in joint session, but you'll have to deal with in caucus. And then the next is, the research shows that mediators who use directive or an evaluative approach with corporate mediation are more likely to be successful than those using a non-directive or facilitative approach. Now, don't get me wrong, if you get to a point and you're about 80 to 90% in a corporate mediation and you pretty much know that you're going to settle that case, guess what? Then you can shift your paradigm of mediation style from an evaluative approach then to a facilitative approach. And you can kind of coast your way through the mediation process then. The next is, which is one of the, what I call one of the scholars and writers of corporate style and international, these two guys, Jacob Berkovich and Sue Mi Lee, are strong proponents on using an evaluative style based on what their research has shown. And so I'm not just sitting here saying, this is Ralph's approach. This is based on, what I'm telling you is based on what I've done from experience, but also is based on research. Because I truly think when you're doing these kind of cases, you really need to be as professional as you can, period. The three main deficiencies of challenges to international mediation are these right here. Number one, the adjudication emphasis. And as I said before, you know what I mean, there's simply no way that you can skip, hop, and sweep under the table, ignore some of the essentially legal issues. It's just simply not going to happen. Not going to happen. You won't get a signature on an international contract if you don't. Number two is overlook value and institutional development and mediation in context. Because essentially you have to really look at, again, the nature of an international mediation because of the priority of it. And guess what? Because of the big picture and because of the macro impact that it has, not just on an individual, but it has on, guess what? It could be 2 or 3 companies. It could be 2 or 3 nations. A lot of these cases also can have international impact on what? Sovereignty issues. And we definitely don't want to start World War III and IV, do we? IDR is an international dispute resolution system to offer a framework to integrate methods and institution fragmentation. In other words, what I'm saying, folks, is this. I don't believe one particular method is always, because there's no one fits all, is it? As many people we have in this room, that's how many approaches that you have to be open, accepting, and understand, and listening, and be involved in terms of how the international corporate type mediation, if you will be settled and worked, mediated, and hopefully be successful. Because one person's style or method might be different than yours. You know what I mean? We're in North America. The style of North America might be totally different than the style in Spain or in Canada or in Mexico or in the Bahamas or in Belize or in Copenhagen or in Russia or in China. And we have to understand that without, you know what I mean, as the judge said earlier, you know what I mean, and you said earlier, without what? Judgment. You know what I mean? Being tolerant, being diverse. You know what I mean? And so that's a very, very critical issue there. You know, and I've had to deal with people, you know, on an international basis. You know, I was in Japan one year and saw where the American would not been able to get, if you will, a contract because they were ignoring how the individual mediators, you know what I mean, goes back to one of the things we heard, you know what I mean, from Nigeria, how you deal with the elders. If you ignore the elders, you know what I mean, you're not going to even get a conversation sometime. So you have to be very careful about that. You know what I mean? If the elder don't say it, it ain't so, is it? You know what I mean? And in some ways, you know what I mean, even in my own African background, I mean, I grew up the same way. If granddaddy said it, you know, amen, and get to getting it. You know what I mean? It's just it. Go ahead, Steve.
Are there any of these mediation organizations that have put together maybe just a pamphlet on different cultures and things like that as a quick reference guide, or are there other?
Yes, there's some organization. Mediate.com is involved in that. ACA, American Conflict Resolution, is involved in that. You have what is called it's called IMI, Institute for Mediation International, involved in that. Mediation Beyond Borders is headed in that way, and part of their whole process as well. That's coming as well, and there's some more, of course, is headed that way. Even the World Mediation Organization is actually involved in some of that as well, as we speak as well. So that is actually definitely going to happen more, because guess what? Very good question, because we are really in a global society, aren't we? But what I always say to people, we always really have been in a global society. The only thing that has been different is the technology is actually shortening the distance in terms of the nature and the context of that global society that we always have been in. And so sometimes when people say, well, we're in a global society now, I said, no, we have always been in the global society.
But we haven't had it at all living.
That's exactly true. So that's the way. Some other thoughts: development of a mixed method of IDR system. And really that's just in a way just saying that mediation in itself is what? It really is an interdisciplinary profession. It is a compilation of psychology, law, communications, social science, and it can be finance, economics, it can be geography. It is a combination of a lot of professions coming together, so that makes it even more important for us, if you will, to not just be pigeonholed from a narrow sense of a narrow set of lens. It makes no sense to do that. An increase in the financial support of the IDR mediation system. You know what I mean? Just like, you know what I mean, in America if you remember the old legal aid society, there was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were put in it. And what I think now maybe one of the great things that could be done, and this is a policy issue, more money could be put into the processes of mediation, you know what I mean, for the good of the country. Because what I truly think is, if more money is put into mediation, we will, as a nation, and I think countrywide, internationally, we also will benefit from the return on the investment from such investment. Because I truly believe you have to give to get, don't you? There's no way around that. I mean, everybody in here, I'm sure, have some kind of investment. And if you like me, I get up every day and I'm reading my stock index report every morning to see how much money I made. Having a mutually supportive legal system which includes mediation on an international basis. That's a given, I think. Integrated mediation approaches will have better outcomes. It's a given. A paradigm shift to integrated approaches that include non-state entities with an increased access to international mediation. Because what that means is some of the private corporate entities, because of the amount of money and how businesses, you all know how some businesses start out and all of a sudden the business become what? $1 million or $1 billion businesses. And so guess what these businesses do? They go and outsource. And where do they outsource at? Other countries. And so when they get into outsourcing in other countries, don't think for one that there are some issues both legally, you know what I mean, financially, culturally, that are involved in all of the different countries that the outsourcing, you know what I mean, is involved. There's a lot of different issues involved. And I won't say any name of any countries for, you know what I mean, clearly for a disclaimer's sake, man, and I want to keep my job too. But in any event, you know what I mean, that's just the way it is. So, including extra legal issues to be mediated for corporations and nations. Because here's what that means. I don't care if you're doing a justice of the peace mediation, which for some people is a small claims court case, which is, if you look at it from a monetary standpoint, that's a case that involves $10,000 or less. It is still a legal case. Because guess what? It still has a cause of action. And what do I mean by that? I don't know anybody in this room, if I say to you, Cassandra, we're going to do mediation, and I just really need you to write me a $10,000 check, and the mediation, I made this over. It's not going to happen. Cassandra has to have some legal basis before she puts any ink on that check. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to help her write the check. But she has to have a legal basis. And we all do, don't we? It's like you go to the store, you're not going to buy something unless it has a value and it has a worth. And that worth and value, in some sense, based on the supply and demand, dictate how much you will pay or not pay. And mediation really is no different. Because you have to look at the value, and the value in mediation is what is the legal issue, because that becomes, especially in corporate mediation, it becomes the core of what you're going to mediate in mediation. Now, don't get me wrong, you know what I mean? You have to play the great psychologist, because if you let it, these cases can get out of control. Don't let these slick willy, vice presidents or CEOs, risk managers, attorneys, don't let them think, they can, get out of control. So, but that doesn't take the reality that the core of it is still a matter of what? Those legal issues, without saying. I'm going to move into just another, and kind of take you a little bit through the process of it a little bit. And the first thing I'll do is kind of, and some of you may have seen this process, some of you haven't. And for those who have seen it, you just go ahead, think about spirits and smile and say it's a great process. Now, this is what I call anatomy of mediation. Just quick question. How many people have seen the anatomy of mediation? Okay, I owe y'all a glass of wine. Okay, thank you. Okay, this process, anatomy of mediation, is, if you look at the yellow circle in, that circle itself basically is what we call the pre-mediation section. That's where you do your assessment, your pre-mediation, your discovery, and if it's interrogatories, and also in this section, that's where you would do your pre-mediation conference. Not the mediation, the conference. That's what that section is. As we move along, there are what we call, in different schools of thought, some people say that there's a 4-stage mediation, some say a 5, some say a 6. I've even had some people have a 12-stage. But I pretty much look at it from a 7-stage. It's not a right or wrong, it's just a matter of what stage that you go by. So my process is based on a 7-stage model, which is the first stage is you have your introduction, your ground rules, your opening statements, what have you, and that's where you give a brief statement about the definition, the meaning of mediation, how the process will be, any disclosures, confidentiality, if the mediation is time, if there's some type of confidentiality issues of time concession, all of that is done there. Yeah. Now, second stage is the uninterrupted time. That's when the parties pretty much tell their story. And let me tell you a secret, and you can write a book on it. Always don't interrupt as a mediator, let the parties tell the story. Here's the reason why. Some people try to put time limits on the story. I always say, why would you put time limits on your money, if you get my drift? The third stage is called the exchange stage. In the exchange stage, that's when questions arise between both parties, what have you. And in this stage, if you're talking about corporate mediation, guess what type of question is going to come up here? Legal questions. That's when you will see attorneys will start to speak. And what they'll do sometimes is they will give you, sometime what they'll do, they will bring a list, both parties maybe, especially the plaintiff, will give you perhaps sometime a list of 12 different, anywhere from 2 to 12 different legal issues that will be discussed in these type of mediations. And you may find some case law, what have you, but one of the fascinations about mediation for me, and I don't know about you, is listening to people's story and how they got to mediation in the first place. And that's why all of us as mediators need to have, if you don't have anything else, you should have the best ears like rabbits to be able to listen without what? Judgment. The next stage is called the agenda stage, and quickly I'll run through this. And of course, those who have been mediators know that's what you're going to mediate. And quickly, fifth stage is the clarification of issues. Again, what'll happen is, if you look at the exchange stage between the clarification stage, if you're dealing with a corporate mediation case, here's what'll happen there. You will have some, what we call, almost like you're in court. You will have some rebuttal between the attorneys on what issues are good, what may not be good, legal issues, and then some of the attorneys sometimes will have some, what I call case law, that they'll be holding on to, you know what I mean, to be one up against the other, whether it be defense or the, if you will, the plaintiff. And a lot of times when we call what type of affirmative defenses that defense may or may not have. And then lastly, the next one, rather, you have the options. What I always recommend, and some of you have heard this before, if you don't have, and I'm telling you, especially with corporate cases, if you don't have a minimum of 15 options, then you're not mediating a corporate case. All you're doing is you're trying to play golf in the courthouse. And of course, you definitely end up, as that we all know, you end up with an agreement. And I don't care what type of mediation you do, it has to be a legally binding, legally contractual agreement that if that if you were to submit it and the judge or jury was looking at it, guess what? They can say this is a very, what I call, airtight agreement, that if you put it on the airplane, it wouldn't crash. That's the kind of agreement you want to have there. Well, you'll see the other things on the side of the anatomy of mediation, which is the facts and issues, options and solutions. It just kind of, what this does is just kind of give you a flow of the process, what have you. If you look to the top where you see the orange triangle, the ADR, that's the process. That's all that really is. When you get to the green triangle there, that's basically when you as the mediator, you shift from the process to managing. Any good corporate mediator has to be a good leader, a good manager, and know how to deal with what we call in psychology the group dynamics issue. Because if you don't know how to deal with group dynamics, and you're talking about doing corporate mediation, stay at home and send me the check. It's just not going to work. And so that's what you have. And then, of course, you're going to have, a lot of times in corporate mediation, relationships are rebirth. So you say, well, you may ask the question, why? The reason is this. A lot of times the corporate mediation may already have a legally binding contract, 2, 3, 4, or 5, typically up to 7 years. And if they can maintain that contract, you ever heard the saying, let's both continue to get paid? That's what that means. Because if they have to go in that contract and go find another contractor, another business, now that's what? More money. And so a lot of times there is in corporate mediation a vested interest in maintaining that contract. You know what I mean? And not only that, if you're a good mediator, guess what? You'll have another contract too. And then lastly is what we call the predictability. Is what I always do and recommend people do is if you go back to the top circle, at the top in the yellow circle, when you do your assessment and analysis, the very next thing you want to do is predict how this case is going to turn out. Don't matter whether you're winning or not. Don't worry about it because you're not at the casino, losing money. So, but what you do is you predict how you professionally, based on what you have done your assessment, how you think the case is going to turn out. How many $1 million may be paid? How many may not be paid? Predict it. And you know what I do is, when I predict it, what I do is I'll write it on a card and I'll put it in my briefcase and I'll put $100 underneath it. And if I get it right, then I go spend $100. If I don't take the $100, I put it back into my bank account. That's what you call win-win mediation.
And a good sense of humor.
Now, we'll quickly kind of go through just a few things, and we'll go through it quickly. Some of you heard, some of you not. When you're doing high complex mediation, some of you have seen this, I call it 3 things. Start the deal, start the deal. And all starting the deal is basically, again, you do your analysis, you get started, establish your financial value. For the interest of time, I'm not going to read everything because you are highly intellectually bright mediators. And so, but that's what you do in starting the deal. Now, what I will say is, again, which we've already said, the most 2 things are you do your legal analysis, you do your financial analysis, you know what I mean? And then if you look at C, you always want to look at what are the potential what? Impasse issues. So we're not, and those are the 4 things. So we're not going to go over those. You monetize, legalize, emotionalize, and communitize. And then you work the deal, and because of corporate cases, as I said again, you're invariably always going to have some level of negligence. Now, we're not going to go into the whole part about it, but, you know what I mean, a little simple formula that I use that's become popular, N plus L equal what? D. N is negligence, L is liability, D is damages. Now, that's different from finding fault. Don't do that. Because people understand, you know what I mean, negligence. And you want to look at negligence from the 4 things of duty to protect, failing to exercise what we call in law a reasonable standard of care, proximate cause, which is the connection, and then lastly the actual injury. And of course I call that a corporate mediation theorem. Work the deal. You work the deal, and as you work the deal, of course you get rid of you assess as much as you can what are the impasse issues, and of course then you're going to shift as the mediation goes. You're going to shift. All mediation has negotiation, but there's a greater level of negotiations in corporate deals. And so you want to look at negotiation from the 4-tier perspective: opening, exploration, negotiation, and settlement phase. You know what I mean? You want to look at that. And then, of course, when you get into closing the deal, there's one thing that you want to do, and I'm gonna get out of this and skip over for a purpose. When you get to closing the deal, you want to always look at this here, and which I highly recommend, that you always want to have a mediation action plan. I never go to the bank without a plan. What is my plan when I go to the bank? Take out less money and save more. That's the way I look at it. So when you have an mediation action plan, you're going to be more successful. There's one school of thought in mediation is that you just come, you sit down, you talk to the parties. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. Because if you do that, and then when you find yourself in a homeless shelter, don't call me. And you can mediate from that venue. You want to have part of the mediation action plan is developing also a negotiating what? Strategy. A very tight strategy, and that strategy is going to be based upon your analysis. And folks, I'm telling you, it has not failed me. Always. Preparation. I mean, it's just like getting an education, isn't it? If all of us in this room did not have an education or some level of education, guess what? we probably would not be mediators or nothing else that we are. We would not be tax people. We would be cultural competence. We would not be working in mediation. We would not be psychologists. We would not be professors. We would not be appraisal umpires. We would not be adjusters. We would not be pastors. We would not be lawyers. We would not be anything, because that's what it amounts to. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing about the mediation action plan, because you can also get a copy of this if you like. But you see, you have your negotiating, you look at your factual background, who are the players, the issues, the goals, and I mean, of course, big on goals. And of course, what does it mean by goals? The goals is what the parties want, isn't it? That's what the parties want. That's what, at the end of the day, that's what's going to come out of it. And of course, if you look at G, it should be 9 to 15, not 9 to 5, because you may not get paid if 9 to 5. And of course, at the end, if this mediation was a success, do you know what would you have gained and learned? I always, to do that. Solution. What are the mutual solutions and what have you? Of course, that's just a little checklist that you can go through. When you're doing it, and so that way you have some type of guidance or follow through or what have you. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. If you want a copy, you can get it. I call it, fact, the FIOS is facts, issues, options, and solutions again. That's kind of what it is. Now, the last thing I would like to just say before we we'll end on a quick mediation role play is this here. If and I don't have it on the, but I have it in the book. And if you want, you can buy the book in the bookstore over there. If you like, it's up to you. And then you want an advanced copy, you can pay me twice. I give you as many you want. But anyway, if you look at this graph here, it's called a mediation action plan. And in it, what it has is, it goes back to giving you a reference. Very, in fact, I always use this. And if you look at the graph, or, you could call it a flow chart. In it, you'll see, first of all, you have, is it single or multi-party? Give you a perspective. Second, mediation type. Is it court order? It's a corporate case, but is it court ordered or not? Because it could be. What countries are involved? What businesses are involved? All right. Conflict level. Is the level low, moderate, or high? In some cases, it could be severe. You know what I mean? What is the complexity of the case? Even if you have a corporate case sometimes, it could be a low, moderate case. Just because it's corporate don't mean that it's always difficult. Sometimes some of the smaller cases can be more difficult than some of the more complex cases with more money. That's part of your analysis. The next is how many mediation interrogatories do you have, which is a set of questions. It could be 25 to 50 to 100 questions. How many, and you as the mediator have to make that judgment professionally, and that's based on assessment. The next thing is, what are the psychosocial issues, if there are some? Now, what I've done in the cases, because just because it's corporate don't mean I don't have psychosocial issues. You know what I mean? Because I had a corporate case one time, and the VP was an alcoholic. So guess what? I ended up recommending the VP to see a psychologist. You know what I mean? And I'm not ashamed to tell you I was afraid to do it, but I did it, and the VP set up an appointment and met a psychologist, and you never know. All right, you have to be careful doing it, though. I'm not saying recommend everybody that way. It may be. But what are the cultural issues? What are the future relationship issues? And of course, we already talked about the style of mediation. And then you'll have, again, what's the BATNA? What is the ZOPA? What range that you predict the case will end or begin in? And you can go BATNA, WATNA, PAT, because you want to do the worst case scenario, best case scenario. What are the any communication inhibitors? And of course, what are the, lastly but least, what are the, impasse inhibitors? And if you look in the back, just say, if you, also what I provided is I put one of the best settlement agreements that will stand the test of any JP, any district, or any Supreme Court in America or anywhere. For that matter, even in the world, in terms of any questions for anyone?
My question is to you, Dr. Steele. When you have that segment that you say you like to see your goal, my question is does it always follow that protocol, or does it change it so much due to the projection of other people, how they're leading or how they're going? And I would like to know how it is that you both maybe move them back to your goals so you can tap on every one of them that you suggested.
Well, see, what I do is again, that's why you have to do assessment. Because if you haven't done an assessment, that's number one, and an analysis. Number two, if you don't have a mediation action plan, and now you get off track, and they're not with the goal, guess what? They're going to be looking for a new mediator. The corporate type mediation, because when you're dealing with high stakes, high money, there's no time for the mediator to have error. You can't work like that. And that's why if I'm going to do a corporate case, I might even have sometimes folks, I've actually had 2 pre-mediation conferences sometimes, because I might be missing something, and so I don't want to do an ex parte communication. You understand what I'm saying? You got to talk to both parties. So I might have 2 conferences, which is okay, because I want to make sure that if you have a goal and you know what their goals is, starting out, you're better off. And then you're less likely to get off track. But if you do get off track, then I'll always go back to what their goals are and what the mediation action plan has. That way you don't have to be fibbling and fumbling and half thinking, and sitting there trying to make up stuff and pretend that you're the greatest mediator in the world, and you've just failed and you ought to be fired, and you shouldn't have been in the mediation from the beginning because you don't know what the hell you're doing. That's the way I look at mediation. But if you have a mediation action plan and you stick to it, sure, you can vacillate and you can get off a little bit. But if you maintain that professionalism and those goals, and then you can always put them back. What I do is this, and this will answer your question. I always go back and say, listen, where do you think the case is going, and what concern that we may be leaving out that we need to do what? Address or readdress. Because sometimes, we're all human beings, aren't we? No, so we may leave out something, not because we're trying, but sometime in mediation, just like in any conversation, people get on a tangent, not intentionally, but because that's human nature. Any other questions? I hope I answered your question, by the way. If you're doing a corporate mediation and it came out here, but you won't see it if you're doing those type much, is you won't see much apologies in corporate mediation. Why do y'all think that? Anybody?
Because that admits fault.
Predicated on that.
It's very good. Once it admits fault, what would you say? The other?
It's not predicated on that. There's the assumption that there's money involved.
That's exactly right. Because business is business, isn't it? And what happens is, it's not that they don't understand that, but people, when you're talking about $675,000, you can't eat apology. And I'm telling you that you won't see much of it, not apology. Now, if you're doing a family mediation, or if you're doing a mediation that was a personal injury or auto accident, yes, you may see. But in a corporate mediation, the only time, just take this here, the only time that I've seen, and you may see, if somebody gets what? Hurt, exactly. What did you say, Charlie?
Hurt or killed.
That's exactly right. If there's some kind of wrongful death happens, or kill or hurt severely, then, and the money is still there, but the rise of apology then will come in. But if it's a situation like what they had, and it's just about, it's money, you're probably not going to see an apology. You're going to see just what you're seeing, some case law, you're going to see relationship, communications, and then that's it.
And what's really interesting is the role that Tim played in saying, you're a good customer, I don't want to lose you. So that sometimes does come into play.
Well, that role in terms of relationships, and a lot of times that's also a myth in corporate mediation, that because it's not about family, that people do not want to keep that. That's not true. It's really the opposite. Now, if they have to terminate it, it may be, and that happens sometime, but the reality is a lot of times they want to maintain that.
If you look at corporations, at least in the state of Florida, like food stores where you go into,
Yeah.
and you go in and you say this product is bad, they'll have a return policy. We'll give you your money back no matter what, because they want to keep your business.
It's very true. Listen, I just want
Had another hour to do it, my deal would have been from the other side of,
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I'm gonna tell you right now, you're locked in at these cheap ass prices. I'm gonna continue to short you, you're gonna be late, but our contract says as long as you get them within 5 months, too bad. So, I got 5 more months to get them to you, suck it up. Or, you know what, take your damn business somewhere else.
They wouldn't have even had to
But
wait
that would
5
have taken
months.
us
They
an
wouldn't
hour.
even sign the contract with you to begin
Right,
with.
right.
For 5 hours.
yeah. Listen, before we go, any more questions or comments?
What about, can you prove it? Does that ever get brought up in corporate
Well,
mediations?
everybody heard the question. It does, and when the question of can you prove it comes up, what do y'all think happens then?
In mediation?
Yes,
Yeah.
especially in corporate.
No.
Well, the dollars either go up or down depending on the answer to that.
That's very true, Tim. That's very true. Also, then that's when that's when those three,
You gotta bring in the-
that's when he rehires the 3 attorneys.
Exactly. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Or he has another attorney to replace them.
Right.
And that's when the law, the case law, or any kind of law comes in. So that's very true there. And what'll happen then is they'll present a legal analysis of the case, and then now you as the mediator will get into what we call the risk analysis, which is part of the legal issues, whether the case is provable or not provable. How does a case look to a jury? How does it look to a judge? That's where it goes. You're going in that direction then. But now, go ahead,
Well,
right?
some of the things that have not been brought up yet in the corporate mediation is the intellectual property aspect of it. You don't want that in front of a jury or in front of a judge.
Yeah.
Information you want to keep behind closed doors. Therefore, mediation is the only.
Well, see,
venue or avenue.
well, you're correct, and that's a different type of corporate mediation case, which I'm gonna get, which crosses what? It crosses borders. Yeah. So that's a different. Because see, the problem is there's different types of corporate mediation case, just like the different kind of cases, and everyone is different and has a different. So, but you're right, though. Go ahead, and then we got
Say
to.
that crosses an ethical boundary, because in the state of Florida, you cannot use what's discussed in mediation in a court of law.
Right.
Well,
But use a lot
but
of
see-
mediation to discover what they're gonna use in court.
Yeah,
but a lot of them do that. You're correct.
in the state of Florida, we read that, even in a court of mediation, that everything is said in mediation is confidential and cannot be used in a court of law.
Oh, yeah, that's understandable. Right. But the issues can be discussed in mediation, sure. No, yeah, absolutely.
And they'll pursue.
Absolutely. Any other comments before we?
Time for spirits.
I'll backdoor you. Once I find out that you
I'm done, I
have a new
confused
computer,
myself.
I won't bring that up in court. I'll just block it to where you can't start your new computer. So, I mean, that's what they do with mediation right now to keep it. And that's why a lot of people,
In Texas?
yes, they don't want to do the mediation on some of these items because of things like Ray was saying. I have a brand new computer chip, okay? We're gonna bring this out in mediation, and that's the reason I want Ray out of the company. I'm gonna be a billionaire now. But we don't get it settled, and it ends up going to court. He sees I'm trying to kick him out, he is gonna bring up, have his attorneys bring up this brand new chip.
Okay.
Now, hold on just a second. So, because I want to address, if you get a case like what you hear Tim talking about, which is important, then now that's going to have a shift in the mediation. Here's how it's going to shift. At the end of that mediation, you're going to have in law what we call a comprehensive liquidation clause. Y'all understand what I'm saying? If the person who's aware of that chip, because they do come up and they talk, the value of that chip or the mediation will be paid back. And let me tell you a secret about that. If there ever was something that a judge will enforce then, that will be enforced. So in other words, it's like having a gag order on your mouth. If you talk, you're stepping in hot. I won't give you the explanation, but that's just the way it is.
You know,
And then we'll get out. We got to get out of here.
I know everyone's tired, but you know, what you just said makes me think of what happened to me, which I didn't take it further.
Yeah.
Florida Power and Light is responsible for our electricity in the state of Florida. One day a transformer blew out on my street. It knocked out my computer, it knocked out my screen, knocked out everything. FP&L denied for 3 months that they even had anything to do with it, even though there were many people who experienced it. My insurance company would not compensate me, FPL would not compensate me, and I just bought myself a new computer and a new screen, and F it. But, you know, if I wanted to take it further, I could have hired an attorney, but, you know, they said that in their clause, they are not responsible for their transformers going.
Yeah.
And that's probably true.
Well, that's not true, but I won't get into that right now because I will get into some legal questions. But we can talk about that later. But that's not true, and when we talk, and I'll explain it to you. Listen, I'd like to thank everybody for being here, coming, and then hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. And I don't know about you, but I am headed toward. There's a place called Spirit City, so that's where I'm headed. Thanks very much.